Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, the 50-30-20 rule is a budgeting method that is meant to help you manage your money better. The Senior Industry Analyst from Bankrate joins us to explain how this rule could help you save. How can people identify whether this rule is the right financial plan for them? After that, the Federal Trade Commission data shows that consumers reported losing nearly $8.8 billion to fraud in 2022. The program's director from Consumer Reports joins us to share some tips on how you can avoid scammers. What are some of the most common scams? Then it is back to school season, and some families need help keeping their kids organized. The CEO of Urban Organyze joins us in studio to share her tips. How can you prepare your kids for the new school year? And finally, the MTA is cracking down on fare evaders, and the MTA has recently raised the fare prices. The senior organizer for Riders Alliance joins me to speak on their fight for fair fares for all. Why is Riders Alliance fighting for fair fares? So stay tuned. All this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello, everyone. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today is Tuesday, September 12th. You are now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. Many Americans find it difficult to save and budget their finances. To assist with making smarter financial decisions, financial experts suggest following the 50-30-20 rule. This involves categorizing expenses into 3 groups and adjusting your spending and saving behaviors accordingly. Senior Industry Analyst at Bankrate, Ted Rossman, joins me to discuss this money-saving method. Ted, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Now, can you just give us an overview of the 50-30-20 rule and pretty much explain what that is?
Sure. The 50-30-20 rule basically refers to this idea that you should spend 50% of your income on necessities, 30% on wants, and 20% goes towards savings. Now, this is a framework, of course. Everybody's budget's going to be a little bit different, but that's the main idea.
Now, how does this actually help in managing your personal finances?
I think it's a good rule of thumb to ensure that you're not overspending in some categories, because really the essence of personal finance is living on less than you make, and hopefully setting money aside for a rainy day and setting money aside for retirement and other future goals. All that said, and I think some viewers are probably thinking this right now, this may be easier said than done. And for example, there's data out there that about a third of New York City residents are spending 50% or more of their income just on rent. So I just wanted to address that sort of at the top here, that if you're feeling a little uneasy or overwhelmed by this, it's a guideline. I mean, yes, we would like to adhere to this or something similar, but it's tough. I mean, life is expensive. Inflation has squeezed people. You can imagine if you're spending half of your income on rent and you're supposed to be spending half on all necessities, what happens with food and medical care and transportation and other things? This is actually one of the things that's really leading to increased credit card debt right now, because a lot of people are having to finance essentials that they may not have the cash flow or the savings.
Now, I'm so glad that you brought that up. I think whenever we're talking about money and saving, it's always great to kind of look at every aspect, because as you mentioned, not everybody may be able to do this, especially if you have very low income or maybe you have very high needs. Why? Can you just explain a little bit further why this may not work for everybody, and how can somebody figure out if this is actually the right method for them?
Especially with housing costs super high right now, and really the cost of everything. I mean, you think about groceries, you think about insurance, gas, all these essentials, not to mention all the discretionary stuff too. I mean, people have a lot of demand for travel and dining and other experiences like concerts and sporting events. And I think another way to look at this is maybe let's start with the 20. So that's supposed to be the savings bucket. I think it does work really well to pay yourself first, because I think a lot of what we're hitting on here is that life is expensive. If you try to save what's left over at the end of the month, there may not be anything left over. So maybe work backwards. Think about carving out that 20% savings first. And honestly, maybe it's not 20% for everybody. Maybe you start with 5 or 10 and you try to gradually bump it up. We're talking about everything from retirement savings, like a 401k, workplace retirement plan, to your emergency savings fund. And maybe consider automating both. A lot of people have these biweekly contributions to a retirement plan and it just gets taken out of your paycheck. Maybe do the same thing with savings and carve out a separate direct deposit that goes into a savings account. Some savings accounts are yielding about 5% right now. So I think that's another way to sort of think about this process is save first and then spend later on.
Now, how does the 50-30-20 rule maybe align or differ from some other budgeting practices that we may have heard of?
Honestly, a lot of people don't even have a budget. So I think we should start there. I think this is really important. Sit down with your spouse if you have one. Try to map it out. It's not going to be exact. It's not going to be the same every month, but some things will be. I would say start with the big stuff: housing, transportation, medical insurance, food, things like that, and then kind of go on from there. Some people like this envelope method where you maybe even literally put cash in certain envelopes for certain types of spending. And maybe you've got your grocery envelope, you've got your restaurant envelope, and other things. And the idea is that when it's out, and you can't just put it on the credit card and finance it at 20% interest. Maybe you could borrow from another envelope. That would be better than borrowing from the bank. Maybe you say that, all right, we're going to eat out less this month because we spent more on other things. Some people talk about this zero-based budgeting approach where you basically give every dollar a job and basically assign from the get-go. Some of this is a little easier said than done, but I think the basic premise is the same. You need to track your spending. So keep a spending journal, or if you're using a credit card or debit card, comb through those statements, figure out what you're spending, and account for the periodic expenses as well. Like if that car insurance renews every 6 months, you don't want that to catch you by surprise.
Now, we're talking about like how it's easier said than done. What if you are starting out in an area where maybe you can't do this? When do you start to say like, okay, I think things are becoming a little bit more stable for me now. Maybe I can try this. When do you encourage people to start looking into this once they are out of a situation that's pretty challenging?
I think it's great to have a budget at any stage. Maybe some of the specific parameters will change. I like this gradual escalation idea. Sometimes a 401k will even do this automatically, where like right now, maybe you can only afford to contribute 5%, but maybe next year that bumps up to 6%. You can do this on your own too. Maybe the next time you get a raise, you bump it up, or maybe you make a note in your calendar that in a year, maybe better yet, 6 months or even 3 months, you go up. The idea, I think, is that slow and steady can win the race sometimes. And a lot of this comes back to long-term pursuits. But, if you set money aside from the get-go, you're less likely to miss what you don't see. So carve it right off the top, have that money go right into investments or savings if you can, and then gradually look to step it up over time. It might be hard to go from saving nothing to saving 20%, but if you go from, let's say, 5 to 7 to 10, over the course of 6 months or a year, maybe that feels more sustainable.
Now, I also want to talk about the fact that this seems pretty flexible. You even mentioned earlier that it doesn't have to be 50-30-20. You can do things that are a little bit more comfortable or something that's more doable for you. Why is that so important, especially when we're talking about finances and money?
The average credit card rate right now is a record high 20.65%. And I think that's an important aspect of this, because if you don't have savings, no shame, a lot of people just aren't able to save. But if you don't have savings and an emergency expense comes up, like a medical bill, a home repair, car repair, and you can't afford it, well, then it lands on the credit card, and then you can get trapped in this expensive debt cycle. So that's, I think, one of the biggest justifications for setting aside this rainy day money. It's a journey, not something that's going to happen overnight. But I think that's also proof that it's working. So if you have this savings, and even if it gets wiped out in a few months by an unexpected bill, well, at least you had it. And then you can start over. So you're not loading up the credit card. What becomes really systemic is minimum credit card payments. If you make minimum payments towards the average balance, which is about $6,000, the average rate, you'll be in debt for about 18 years. And you're going to pay way more in interest than you did in the first place. Your total interest bill would be about $8,500 on top of the $6,000 you charged in the first place. So I use that as a cautionary tale to say that, yes, it may be easier said than done, but every little bit you can save helps future you, but it also helps you ward off this expensive credit card debt.
Now, we talked about how sometimes it's hard for people to create a budget. And I can imagine sometimes it's a little bit discouraging if you don't feel like you have a good foundation. But what are some tips or steps that you think individuals can take so that they can create a budget? And as you mentioned, kind of gradually grow in this area?
Some people keep it really simple and old fashioned, where they write it out on paper or they stuff money into envelopes. You could use a very simple spreadsheet. There's actually a lot of apps out there. There's one that's very popular among young adults called You Need a Budget. And there are apps, there are websites that can help you with this. I think the biggest framework is you need to know where you've been in order to know where you're going. So I don't think enough people are having these conversations. I think it's important to sit down with your spouse. Maybe the first time you do it, you set a timer, because people don't want to get bored with talking about money forever and ever. But maybe you set a 15-minute timer, you do it over a glass of wine or something like that. I think over time we can get even more intentional about these kind of money conversations, but figure out what you've spent recently, what you need to spend this month, and over time start to think about those future goals too, because I think that's really what gets people pulling in the same direction about, all right, we're not just budgeting to deprive ourselves from something, but we're budgeting because we want to do something in the future. Whether that's having a kid or buying a home or saving more for retirement or taking a great vacation, try to think about a budget as a tool that helps you get what you want, not just something that's denying you in the near term.
And I also think it's so important to mention that when you do this, you actually learn how much money you're spending on things, because when you just do it naturally, you don't notice like, wow, I spent $100 on like takeout this week. And so I think it could only help, people in the long run. And although it can seem intimidating, I think that it's a worthwhile effort to take, when saving money. Now, can you just talk about just the benefits overall of being properly informed and choosing the right budget plan? Because 50-30-20 may not work for everybody, but what can they do to make sure they're choosing the right thing?
Yeah, I like that example that you just gave about tracking your spending can help you realize, do you have money leaks? Are you spending too much on takeout? Could you benefit from cooking at home more, or bringing lunch to work, or making your own coffee? I think sometimes people kind of scoff at these ideas that, like, if you skip the $5 coffee every day, you're going to become a millionaire in the future. It maybe isn't quite that simple, but I do think that there is some truth to this money leaks phenomenon. Or maybe it's too many Uber rides. Could you take the subway instead? At least some of the time. I think there's moderation to a lot of things, but I think that's really another foundation to a good budget, is kind of figuring out what you value, what you can afford to spend. It's going to be different for different people, but prioritize those key spending categories. Obviously the essentials, but even within that discretionary piece, are there some things that you're just spending kind of mindlessly on, or are there things that you truly value? Do you have overlapping subscriptions? Could you cut back on some of those extra happy hours or expensive cab rides when you could do something cheaper?
Well, Ted, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this really informative conversation.
Thank you for having me.
To learn more about the 50-30-20 rule, please go to the website on your screen below. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open right after this.
My character, Shazam, knows all about growing up in a family full of teenage superheroes. They're bold.
Where's everyone going?
To fight crime?
Okay.
Adventurous. Shazam! There's never a dull moment. And no matter what happens, they'll always have your back. All they need is a place to grow and be themselves. And the best part is, you don't have to be a superhero to adopt a teen. Learn more about adopting a teen from foster care. Visit adoptuskids.org. You can't imagine the reward.
Most hiring algorithms would scream me out.
Some bosses couldn't see me as a leader.
I've run this place for 20 years, but I still need to prove that I'm more than what you see on paper.
I've been running code as long as I've been able to reach a keyboard.
This is what I do. It's second nature for me, coordinating 100 details at once.
The way my mind works, I have a very mechanical brain.
I sold them on my skills.
You gotta be so good they can't ignore you.
My magic is
Analytics and empathy. That's how I'm getting clients. You have to have the confidence in yourself to show up and defy the odds.
I am more than who I am on paper.
I never got a college degree. And today, I'm the CEO of my own company. People want to tell me I'm one in a million, when actually I'm one of millions. Stars are all around us. It's time for them to shine.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Thanks for hearing me out, bro.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Welcome back. Every year, scams become more common, and with the holiday season just around the corner, it's important to remain alert. Newly released Federal Trade Commission data shows that consumers reported losing nearly $8.8 billion to fraud in 2022. The program's director for Consumer Reports, Chuck Bell, joins me to discuss various scams and to provide tips on how you can avoid falling victim to them. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Now, I think it's really important to just think about the fact that, scams are still at an all-time high. What's making people vulnerable to scams even in 2023?
Well, so as we've adopted advanced technology, and particularly smartphones, it's become easier and easier to contact people. We have, if you think about it, several different platforms most of us participate in, such as email, texting, social media, and phone. And so we've always had a lot of telephone fraud, but now it's expanded to these other platforms. And scammers can work their business from different corners of the globe. At $8 billion a year in fraud, it's a huge business. And they don't have to get every consumer to respond to their pitch. So if they send out 1 million emails and only 20 people respond, they can still make money. And so the business model is such that they can make money sending lots and lots of texts to people and hoping a few will respond.
Now, as you mentioned, $8 billion, that's a lot of money to make on, just in scams. And as you mentioned, they don't need everyone to respond, just a few people to still make so much money. Why are we actually seeing an increase despite, a lot of organizations kind of spreading awareness? Why are we seeing an increase?
These folks are sophisticated criminals, the scammers, and they're very good at what they do. And they can also test their approaches across millions of different consumers. So they adopt methods that tend to work. They impersonate companies like Amazon or sometimes government agencies like the IRS. And they tell you have to act right away. And so a lot of times their high pressure tactics are effective with some consumers. Some consumers are scared that they might be a victim to financial fraud if they don't take immediate action in response to a text. So these pitches that they make, they can be pretty compelling, and you have to be prepared as a consumer to resist the high pressure sales tactics.
Now, according to the FTC, the number one scam was basically becoming an imposter. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that type of scam? And, what are some things people should look out for? Because you mentioned that, they'll try to impersonate maybe Amazon. I understand that there's also the one with UPS and telling people that they have mail coming in, maybe when they don't. So can you just talk a little bit more about that scam and what people should look for?
Sure. So an imposter scam is basically a scammer posing as someone that they are not. And it could be a family member, for example. So, we had the recent case in New York City of somebody who lost $50,000 to someone who called posing as his son. So a lot of times when that happens, people freak out. You get some type of a contact out of the blue, and you're encouraged to act immediately without really even thinking about what's going on. And so this is number one rule for consumers. You need to be skeptical about any out of the blue outreach, whether it's from someone claiming to represent a family member or a lot of times it's from companies. So those pitches are also very convincing because people want to secure their bank accounts and secure their relationship with Amazon or whatever online merchant is out there. But a lot of times you don't realize that text is actually not coming from Amazon. And so if you get those types of alerts from your bank or from your credit card company, you are always better off to put your phone aside and go to the computer or go to your phone and call the credit card company yourself. Don't respond to an alert if you can't verify where that alert is coming from. And that's really the number one rule that people now have to follow to avoid getting taken in these types of scams.
Now, you mentioned the case where, someone thought their son was in trouble and that's how they were scammed. I think that this is like a new type of scam. And I understand that it involves like technology and AI. And I've heard about this before where people will use your voice to sound like someone else. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that and how technology is actually influencing this trend and, unfortunately making things a little bit harder to spot?
Sure. So, one of the insidious things that's happening is with artificial intelligence, the scammers can sometimes find recordings of your voice on the web, somewhere on social media or TikTok, and actually rearrange the words that you're saying or say similar words in a tone of voice that sounds like your voice. So you have to be aware that your parent could get a call with a voice that sounds a lot like you, and it's actually just a synthetic voice that's been cooked up by a scammer. And a lot of times with that type of ransom scam, they're often saying that, your son has been arrested or they're in jail in South America. You have to go to the Walgreens and get $25,000 worth of gift cards and send it to me immediately. So any type of immediate request for payment using an unsecure method like gift cards or crypto or wire transfers or peer-to-peer apps like Zelle or Venmo, you really want to avoid responding to that in an emergency. You'll be better off to contact your relative if you can, or really take your time and realize that this is potentially a fraud proposition, and you don't want to be sending money to people who don't know, and you'll probably never see it again.
Now, people often assume that older generations are, the ones getting scammed. And as I can understand why that may be a thought just because of how much technology has played a role in these scams recently. But can you just talk about how this is also affecting younger generations as well?
Yes, sure. So while in the old days, it used to be the case that older folks were the target for most scams, over time, because younger people are big users of smartphones and social media, the scammers are really targeting everyone of all ages. And there's actually evidence that more people in the younger ages, in their 20s through 40s, are responding to scams and getting scammed at a higher rate. However, older folks still tend to lose more money because they have more in savings that they could lose. So in imposter scams, I believe folks over 65 tend to lose $1,000 or more, whereas for younger folks, it might be in the $200 to $400 range. But just because you're younger doesn't mean that you're not going to be a target for these ripoff artists. So you have to be on your guard to protect yourself.
Now, surprisingly, business and job opportunities are among the top 5 scams in 2022. How are people scamming others with job opportunities and I guess business? Because this is actually the first time I've heard of something like that.
Yeah, so there are a number of scammers who will try to promote get-rich-quick schemes of various types. Sometimes they're investment schemes involving digital currency or crypto, but they might be advising you on how to set up a web store, make lots of money on the internet. Sometimes those scams, you can detect them because they're going to ask you for some type of advance payments, which seems counterintuitive. Like they're saying you could get rich quick, but pay us $3,000 for setup costs so that we can help you get your online store set up, things like that. So anything where there's an advance payment is often an indicator that it may be a scam. And so consumers really would want to do their homework and make sure that it's a reputable company that has a physical address. And ideally, you'd like to know someone else who's worked at that company and actually made some money doing that activity. So you really have to be careful about any get-rich-quick scam. And if something sounds too good to be true, it often is.
And is there anything, I guess, for people who are looking for, I guess, normal jobs, are there anything that they should look for in regard to that in scams?
So again, I think the thing to do is to verify that it is a legitimate company. There are various ways you can check their record with the Better Business Bureau or the New York State Department of Labor. You can find out if it's a real company and if they have real workers and are actually paying wages. With a lot of schemes that are promoted over the internet, company could be located anywhere, and a lot of them are indeed fly-by-night, criminal enterprises.
Now, I want to talk about the holiday season as it is around the corner. A lot of people are more prone to be scammed during this time. Can you quickly just talk about what people can do to make sure they're not falling a victim to that, especially during what's supposed to be the happiest time of the year?
Yes, sure. So, one thing is when we get to holiday time, consumers are engaging with merchants more. So in a way, you're going to be more vulnerable to schemes that reference Amazon or UPS or other companies that you might be shopping with. And so it's very possible that one of those companies would send you a text alert, but you have to be on your guard to make sure that the text alert that you are receiving is actually from that company. And so a lot of times if you get something on your phone, email or text saying, we need you to reinsert your credit card number, for example, don't respond to that message, but go to the Amazon website itself and see if your payment information is in there, see if that message actually came from Amazon or some other vendor. So a lot of the common subtext of those scams is that they're trying to get under your radar. You might have just placed an order with Amazon, and so the scammers are taking advantage of the fact that there's a lot of economic activity going on. And so when you get a urgent message from your credit card company or the merchants, you're more likely to respond to it. So I think this is a period where you have to be particularly careful. And a lot of times, your information is secure and you don't need to do any of those things. So you can regard those texts with a great deal of skepticism. A lot of times, too, those texts will try to take you to a website that might insert malware on your computer or phone. So you don't want to be clicking on websites when you're not sure where it's going to take you.
Now, can you quickly, we have about a minute left, can you just quickly let people know what they should do if they are the victim of a scam?
Yeah, so we have a number of resources in the community. In New York City, you have the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, which helps with scams and fraud relating to local businesses. You have Attorney General Tish James, and her office can help with scams and fraud. It's useful if you have been defrauded to report the fraud to the Federal Trade Commission, and they will investigate based on the patterns of complaints that they receive. So that is reportfraud.ftc.gov. And it's often embarrassing to admit that you've been a victim of fraud, but it's also an increasingly common experience. So don't feel bad. Speak out and try to protect your neighbors and your loved ones and other people in the community. So I would encourage people to speak out and try to sound the alarm so that others will not be ripped off and defrauded as well.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Stay tuned. We have more Open View right after this.
Now my heart out there in the open. Trees make you feel smaller. Can't help but get lost again.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
Where did that time go? I don't know how I got here. Ooh.
done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Jason, let's go see your room.
What do you think? We kept it a little spare, so you can decorate it how you like.
Dinner!
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I saw you guys out there. We're in the
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Welcome back. With school officially back in session, organizations are providing helpful tips to assist parents in transitioning their families. Laura Kinsella, professional organizer and CEO of Urban Organyze, is joining me to discuss effective ways for families and college students to prepare for classes. Laura, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you tell me about your organization, Urban Organyze?
Of course. Urban Organyze is a professional home organizing company based in the heart of New York City. We transform cluttered homes into beautifully functional and stylish spaces based on you and your family's unique needs and lifestyle. I founded my company in 2015 with this real mission to empower professional working women juggling, the most, their kids, their careers, their homes, and really to help them regain clarity and control through organizing to keep everything afloat.
Now, you mentioned it's New York City, which I'm imagining that's where the name Urban Organyze came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know, like, living in New York, being organized is not the easiest thing since we have such small spaces and a lot of family members and a lot to have in these small spaces. So can you just explain, what that experience is like helping other New Yorkers organize their space?
Sure. Living in New York is a big blessing. I'm raising my daughter in New York. I'm a born and bred New Yorker, but space is really at a premium and the walls can really feel like they're coming in fast on you. And I think when you're living in a home and you're living in a shared space, it's really important to define that your home is more than just a place to store your stuff. It's your sanctuary. It's where you and your family relax. And there are key things to do, including creating these personalized organizational systems so that everyone can enjoy what it is they love and also keep a very tidy home.
Now, you mentioned that it started in 2015, but what actually inspired you, or what was the moment that you knew this was like a step you wanted to take?
Sure. Well, organizing has always been a part of my life. I was definitely that child that organized soup cans in my mom's kitchen, and I did these things for fun, which may or may not be something that people understand, but it was really my way to feel more in control in an environment that oftentimes felt chaotic. It was my own form of self-care. And so I didn't know I was going to be a professional organizer. In fact, I had a decade-long career in the arts as a Broadway performer and intermittently in that time worked as a nanny. And really what I found was the common denominator with all these families was they were overwhelmed by stuff. And I felt this guttural need to help them transform their space because really clutter wasn't just about the physical items in their home. It was manifesting in everything. It was reverberating in their careers, had a negative relationship with their work and their relationships. And that is sort of where I decided, this is something I can do to really help people and to change their lives.
Now, I want to kind of talk about school and how that kind of fits into it. Now, of course, when we think school, of course you want to be organized, but how did you realize these two things actually should be combined together and how it's kind of a family effort?
Yeah. So, school is a very structured environment. And really, in order to keep things running smoothly, it's all about consistency and routine and having things so that your brain isn't having to remember all of the moving parts. The number one way to do this, especially with a family, is keeping a family calendar. Whether you are a paper calendar person or a digital calendar person, it's really having accessibility so that everyone knows what's expected of them and where all these days come into play, because it's too much for our brains to remember school holidays and parent-teacher conferences and after school activities. So really keeping a family calendar is key. And then in order to get all of your family members on board, because it is a group effort, it is being organized is a lifestyle. And even if you have young children, just instilling age-appropriate things that they can handle themselves, whether they have to tie their shoes independently in the morning, or if you have older kids and they're responsible for packing their own lunches or making sure they have everything they need, their devices are packed and charged, so that everyone knows what's expected of them and everyone can keep, organized through a very structured environment.
Now, I think before working on this segment, I didn't realize how much effort went into getting your kids ready for school and how much it's almost like it's back to school for the parents as well, because you're a huge part of it. Can you just talk about ways that parents can prepare kids before they even enter the school? And, what actually goes into making sure they're prepared for that?
Absolutely. You're right. There's so many spinning plates in the air. I think some key things to really keep you and your kids accountable. The first thing is, there's inevitably going to be homework, whether you have a kindergartner or you have a high schooler. So really dedicating a workspace, whether that's your kitchen table or your kids have their own desk, where all their supplies are handy and stocked, so that, again, they're not nagging you last minute. Where are the sharpened pencils? Or why don't I have this? And then you're having to do these last minute runs to CVS or wherever your convenience store is to get what they need. The other thing is we really want to keep our kids' brains fueled so that they can focus and that they can do the task at hand. And in order to do so, we need to keep our pantries and our fridge stocked with really nice and healthy snack options so that your kids can access these things all by themselves. They don't have to bother you. And they, again, can focus and not feel like they're in a brain fog and fatigue trying to do what it is they need to do.
Now, what is a drop zone and how can it help with organizing?
A drop zone is a designated area in your home, typically in the entryway, but it can be any high functioning area like your kitchen that collects all of those things that you're using all the time that are going in and out of your home. So that can be your keys, your phone, your wallet, your shoes, your bag, etc. The reason why it's important is that these items can get lost very quickly and they can easily make you late for work and late for school. So just doing little things like adding hooks by the front door so your kids can hang up their own coats, or having bins that for each designated family member to put their backpacks or their shoes so your floors remain clutter-free and you know exactly where to find these items when you're in a hurry.
Now, what happens after school is just as important as what happens during school. Can you talk about the importance of having an after-school routine?
Sure. It is absolutely critical. It instills responsibility and accountability for your children so that they know exactly what time they have to do their homework and focus on their studies, what time dinner is, what time their extracurricular activities and interests are. And that doesn't mean you need to be militaristic in your routine, but when you have a routine, everyone knows what's expected of them. And it really avoids arguments when your kids are like, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that. They know that certain things happen at a certain time. And more importantly, it carves more time for relaxation and self-care because our kids are so overscheduled and overworked these days. It's really important that we maintain a schedule in order to decompress from the day.
Now, I want to talk about high schoolers and college students, as I can imagine that's probably a little bit more stress off of the parents since these kids are a little bit older and can handle things themselves. What are some tips you would give to older students who are maybe struggling to stay organized as we go back to school?
Yeah, so time management is huge. And I think for high schoolers and college students, especially, it's all about task prioritization. You can have 400 things that you have to do in your day. And in order to keep all of those bigger blocks done, really looking at in totality what you have to complete and breaking those down into like manageable, micro, bite-sized tasks so that you are not totally fatigued and overwhelmed and it doesn't lead to burnout. You know exactly where you can carve out time for not only your academic success, but your personal success is in growing into becoming young professional adults.
Now, as students become older, stress becomes more of an obstacle. How can being organized help with this? Or, could stress make it more challenging to be organized?
Yeah, so there's so much research out there showing the direct link with clutter to stress, clutter to anxiety, depression, overwhelm. And really living an organized life is a key way to relieve stress in your life. Because as much as I'd like to say that, I can eradicate stress for you, it's an inevitable part of life. And we really want to just make it manageable so that it doesn't become chronic. So being organized really can help you in all aspects of your life. It can help you with better sleep patterns. It can help you in your relationships, in your work. It really just keeps everything calm and easy.
Now, how can people overcome falling off and possibly going back to their old ways? Because staying organized, you feel so motivated, but then sometimes something happens and you go back to your old ways. So what can we do to avoid that?
Yeah, so it's a question I get a lot. And I think really having that positive mindset about what you want your home to be for you. How is it serving you and not the other way around so that you can create more time and energy for the things that you love so that when you're going through and deciding what to get rid of, you have that frame of mind of, is this supporting my life? Is this supporting my values and, what I'm interested in instead of this former version of myself? And there are certain things you can do. Certainly there's what we call a 1 in, 1 out rule, so that when you get something new, you let go of something else. It really does keep the volume in check so that you're respecting your home's limits, no matter how much square footage you have. And really just keeps organizing a daily practice because it's a habit shift in your daily habits to keep you, more ease and more happy throughout your life.
Now, what do you do to help motivate people to actually take that first step? I know for me, sometimes I wait till I get angry. I'm like, I can't, which is not good. So what do you do to motivate people before they get to that point?
Yeah, I think that we bite off more than we can chew sometimes. And in order to do that, we really need to, manage our own expectations. I hear people say, I'll just tackle my basement or whatever in a day or this weekend. And we forget that we have kids and a job and our own lives. So I like to say to start really small, and sometimes even setting a 15 to 20 minute timer really does help so that you can remain focused on the task at hand. And you'd be so surprised to see what you can accomplish in such a short amount of time. And it really is contagious. And slowly but surely, you'll make your way to a home that is functioning perfectly or, as perfectly as you can. And that feels good for you and your family.
Well, Laura, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you would like to learn more about organization tips, whether for the school year or just your average household needs, please go to Laura's website at www.urbanorganyze.com. We'll be back with more Open right after this.
I don't know why you're so sad. You've got a roof over your head.
Bro, you gotta stop with that depression stuff. That's a white people thing.
Escúchame, en esta casa los hombres no lloran.
You alright?
It just feels like it's coming from everywhere.
Do you want to talk about it?
Thanks for hearing me out, bro. Appreciate it.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad. Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Welcome back. As the MTA struggles with fare evasion, plans to begin a new initiative called the Bus Stop Hub approach could potentially be used to catch and fine passengers who refuse to pay. However, many people would prefer to take an approach that fights for fair or free transit fares. Senior Organizer for Riders Alliance, Danna joins me to explore how these new tactics from the MTA could impact New Yorkers and the possibility of a fare-free New York City. Danna, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Kibin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Now, can you provide an overview of the Riders Alliance mission and some of the work that you do?
Sure. The Riders Alliance is a non-for-profit grassroots organization. We're made up of subway and bus riders from all across New York City, and we try to fight for what we call transit justice. We look through that lens in three different ways. Justice to us would mean having faster trains and buses, less delays, more accessible stations, or fully accessible stations, actually, because at this point, we're just over 25% of our transit system, and just making sure that riders are getting what they pay for and are able to afford the transit system.
Now, you were on one of our shows back in 2019. Could you explain or tell us a little bit more about the hashtag Expand Fair Fares campaign?
Yeah, that was probably just as Fair Fares was rolling out. And here we are years later, and now we're talking about expanding the Fair Fares program. So Fair Fares is a discounted MetroCard subsidy at the New York City level that is offered to any rider that is a resident of New York that is between the ages of 18 and 64. That rider needs to make at or below the federal poverty line as far as their income. And it's pretty low, right? So it means a single individual needs to be making around $14,700 or less, and a family of four needs to make $29,000 or less. And if you know anything about New York and our, rising rent costs and everything else that we're juggling to afford here, it's a pretty low rate. Yet we're very happy about the program. It's had quite great success. We have over 300,000 riders that are enrolled in using the program. And so that's been good. But our call this year has been for the mayor to expand Fair Fares program, right? And so while the program is great and the subsidy is there, we haven't been able to really hit the mark, and make a dent in terms of the riders that are most transit dependent and need it right now to be affordable. And so in our call to expand it, we would love for the mayor to double the eligibility rate. So it would mean that a single individual making up to $29,000 could qualify for the program, and a family of four making up to $60,000 could qualify.
Now, why do you think this is still an issue we're having in the city? As mentioned, this was like back in 2019. It's been several years. Why are we still having this problem in New York?
In terms of affordability?
Yes.
Well, that's a layered question. I will stick with transit. I think there are, many reasons why people are still struggling, right? So like other things around them outside of transit have kind of gone up. What I love to say is that a low income rider is they're carrying a weight of poverty that is something that they have to hurdle through long before they get to the turnstile. And so we think about, well, why can't this person put money on their MetroCard? What does the $275 or now $290 mean to them, right? With the recent fare increase. But it means quite a lot if I am already struggling to put food on my table. I'm struggling to pay tuition. I don't have my medication. I don't have childcare costs, right? So I'm juggling all those things. And then I get to the turnstile and it's like, well, where would it come from in my budget? So I think that's why it's still going to be an issue pretty much.
I think that stress is now going to be added because, as you mentioned, the fare is even higher. It's almost $3. And the MTA just announced the presence of Eagle Team officers at bus stops to address fare evasion. How effective do you think this tactic will be? And what potential challenges do you see happening because of this?
Yeah, so just as I just mentioned, like riders, in terms of the Eagle teams are already facing all of these hurdles, right? And I think that folks are understandably a little, shaky about that. They're like, well, I can't afford this. And now I'm kind of being punished for a crime of poverty. I think it's a real opportunity for the mayor to focus on making sure that the fare is actually affordable for riders. We know that the fare went up. And for some people, an extra 15 cents may not, for many riders, they may not feel it. But for the most transit dependent, right? So the Black and brown rider, the immigrant rider, the single parent that is trying to pay for childcare, the person that can barely afford to get on the train and bus as it is, that 15 cents, they can already feel that impact. They can see places where they can put that money back into their budget.
And I also want to ask, are teenagers expected? I never knew this. I think most teenagers have like their school metro, but those don't work on the weekends, or, if they already use it to school, they can't use it again. So are they expected to pay? Is that something that parents have to think about as well?
Yeah, so student metro cards and discounts, I think, go up to the age of 18. And so that's why we have an income age bracket for fare fares, which is 18 to 64. So it's a senior subsidy. And then there's also a subsidy given to folks who have qualifying disabilities. And so students wouldn't be impacted as they would get their metro card, those in public school and private school who are, not doing undergrad. Now, if you're a college student, that is something that you have to think about. Yeah, they would be impacted. We encourage those who fall within the fare fares income bracket to apply. They can apply through HRA, which is the city agency that sponsors the fare fares program. They can go to the website, the app, and hopefully be able to qualify. But yeah, it's something for them.
Now, how do you perceive the implementation of AI technology that's being used to track fare evasion on the subway? I know that sounds like pretty alarming to a lot of people, and I understand that it is actually already being used. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? And, how do you think that's going to affect New Yorkers?
Yeah, I think that so there's two folds to that, right? Like, people hear AI and they get tense. Understandably so. I will say there are some benefits, and then there are some things that make people pause. So one benefit that I can highlight in that is, using artificial technology to have this kind of surveillance, granted, if the surveillance is actually going to protect people's privacy, because that's always the layer, right? Like, well, how intrusive can this be? So let's say that it actually is protecting people's privacy. It can be a benefit in the fact that it would limit a lot of unnecessary contact between riders and police officers. We don't want to always have those interactions where people are being enforced. Specifically, as I've mentioned, that the most transit dependent are people who are from communities of color, low income, and usually, if we don't have to have an unnecessary summons or ticket given to someone, that, could be a benefit. One thing that I would say make people pause is, the MTA is coming out of this moment where they just had a huge financial crisis. A lot of us have, and are still coming out of what has, impacted us in ways of COVID. And so now that we've seen this investment in the MTA on the state level, we want to make sure that the money and funds that are available are being used in the right way. And so it's kind of hard, I think, for riders to see a time when, like, they're investing in surveillance when we're like, well, can you be investing in service levels going up? What riders really want out of transit is to make sure that they're getting to work and school on time, that their bus shows up in time on a scheduled manner, and their train as well. So we'd love to see more of other things in transit spaces, I'd say.
And I also want to add to that, because of some of those concerns, people were shocked to see that the price did go up. And I can imagine it's only going to continue to go up in the future. Can you just talk about how that's going to impact New Yorkers just long term?
Yeah, I would say that this is one of the reasons why, again, we are calling for the mayor to expand the fare fares program. This is a moment where folks can have the double of eligibility. Right now, that bracket is so low, and many things are going to go up. It is not just, our trains and buses. Like we said, we're hitting kind of housing, roof levels, food. I mean, I go into the supermarket and I'm like, ready to cry. I'm like, I walked out with 2 bags and I spent $100. So all of these things are weighing on us. And I think that it is a moment where transit has had many years of kind of pausing and not had an increase. And now we have this very small increase to some of us and major to others. So we are calling for the governor and the mayor to kind of look again and say, what can happen with fare fares? How can we help people? Doubling the eligibility would take us from where we are now with 300,000 riders, just over 300,000 riders enrolled, upwards to 1,750,000 riders being eligible for fare fares. That's a lot of people in New York that we could help.
Now, I also want to talk about, because I know that you mentioned the mayor and even the governor. Sometimes people often think like the MTA is this like single thing that's on their own, but how much does the mayor or, the governor impact some of the work that the MTA does, and what power do they actually have in that regard?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's a big part of my job, is making sure that riders understand who runs what and what their power is also as a rider, because I just want everyone to know you do have power as a rider. There's power in your voice. But in terms of transit, so when we look to the subway, when we look to, reliability, more elevators, things like that, that is where we point to the governor. She runs the state, she's over the budget, and also the agency itself is under the state as well, right? So in the board, she has the most appointees on the MTA board. So that's important. When we talk about the buses, though, that's really a combined effort between the mayor and the Department of Transportation, the DOT. The mayor has the power to speed up buses, to enforce bus lanes. We're fighting locally here in the Bronx, even for a Fordham Way busway, on Fordham Road, And, if you're a Bronxite, then you know just how important Fordham Road is to this local area. So across the city, we look to the mayor to kind of handle that. And riders need to know the difference. You're right.
So I'm so glad that you clarified that for us. So thank you. Also want to talk about the concept of a fare-free bus route. It's gaining traction. Can you just talk about the reality of that? I know everybody would love to live in a world where, the fare was free. But can you just talk about, what's going on with that? And is that something that we could actually see in the near future?
Yeah, I think, in this past budget, so just to be clear, each borough in New York will get a free bus route. I don't want to name all because I'm not going to say I remember all. And I think folks are really excited about this. This was a moment where this came out of the budget, where we were also fighting for frequency, and we're able to win a lot of that on subways. People are never going to shy away from the idea of something being free. I think what riders also want, in addition to buses being free, is buses to come on time, right? We want to make sure that buses can cut through the traffic. And certainly we're not opposed to that happening, but we don't want to wait for a bus for 40 minutes and 30 minutes. We need to make sure that it's dedicated and, I can get there. Any of us have ever waited for a bus for more than 20 minutes. You know that you're exposed to the elements. You're in the cold. You're in the snow as we're approaching the winter. You're in the heat, like a hot day like today, right? Our seniors are on buses, folks with walkers, strollers, and we need to make sure that these people don't stand at the stops, pile up, and they can get to where they have to go as well. It's important.
Well, Danna, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having a conversation about something that affects almost every New Yorker. So once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kibin.
To keep up with the Fair Fares for All campaign, please go to their website at www.ridersalliance.org. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recap cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Hymie on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.